Cool. Yeah, so I will deliver the first talk today, hopefully around with questions and so on, 45 minutes to an hour, and then we will have a second talk today, and after the second talk, or in between a short break, and after the second talk, then there will be a networking session, and we have foods and drinks and so on, everything that's needed, of course. Okay. Yeah, so as I said, my talk today is about no estimates with a subtitle, a deep dive into business agility. How does this go together? We'll find out. And yeah, I mean, most of you have that problem, like how are you actually estimating, and do these estimates that you're doing actually make sense? And this is actually what drove me to deliver this talk. So yeah, I'm also calling myself agile coach, but there's like many more things that I do, whether it's a team lead, whether it's just project management. You know, it's all like very interconnected and not really separate. So I'm somewhere in between all these things. Quick agenda for today. So intro, that's what we're currently doing. Then we're doing a deep dive into this whole new estimates thing, and I will give you some examples, also some real world examples. Afterwards, recap, and as I said, then a short Q&A session. Yeah, so how did I actually get to this topic, this whole topic, no estimates? So around 2 months ago, I was happy to welcome a new colleague in our team, David. He's sitting in the back there. And David is a very curious kind of guy. And David, in the first refinement session, actually noted, hey, they're not estimating, so why are you not estimating? I said, okay, how much time you've got? It's going to be a long discussion. And actually we set up a meeting the next day, I think next day, day after, and we discussed around an hour around this topic. And afterwards we were both sitting there and said, yeah, in this kind of context, it doesn't really make sense. So then we both came up with the idea to do this talk, and yeah, this is why I'm standing here now, to actually tell you our story. So how did we get there? How did we end up not estimating? And I want to tell you the whole story around this no estimates movement and its counter movement, which is called, surprise, surprise, estimates. And in the end, we'll find out that they basically have the same goal, which is a funny thing, considering that they want to do exactly the opposite. So what is not my goal today? Not my goal today is definitely telling you that all estimates are senseless, that they don't make sense, but I rather want to tell you to experiment and to find the real fields of application and their usefulness. So about this whole new no estimates movement. This whole new estimates movement is coming from like around 10 years ago. I think it was 2011 or 2012 that some guys around, they're called Woody Zuhl, Neil Killick, Wasco, Duarte, Alan Hollop, and so on, that they actually came up with the idea, with the very provocative statement, all estimates are waste. They're not adding any value. That was the statement. And I was like, okay, I don't know, yeah. Let's dig deeper. I'm really interested what they got to say. And so what are we doing? That's actually one of the goals, of course, revisit all this whole movement, all what they did in the last 10 years. And how are we going to do that? So I will utilize two different terms throughout the whole talk. One of them is estimations and the other one is complexity. So to start, I will give you a brief overview what an estimation actually is. I got this from the Cambridge Dictionary, so just the basic definition of estimation. So an estimation, what it says is a guess or calculation about the cost, size, value, etc. of something. There could be a computer-aided estimation, estimation of the cost, usually what we talk about in software development. When we talk about the ETC, then it's person hours, complexity, whatever. So you see, one can estimate a lot of things. And also these whole estimates can be in so many different kinds of complexities. So complexity is actually the state of having many parts and being difficult to understand or find an answer to. So this could be, a problem of great complexity. So how are we going to do this now? Because there are so many questions that we really need to structure in order to get to a result and whether to estimate or not. So first of all, like, who is estimating? A developer? What are we estimating? Who are we estimating for? CTO, for the PO? What is the importance here? Is it just a small customer project? Is it the next big thing in tech? Is it, like, what are we estimating? A story, a requirements document in person hours, in story points, or like, are we estimating the most important project of the whole company history that is so super important for the next, I don't know, couple of years? Yeah, and of course, that's just what consultants do. They love frameworks. So yeah, the Kinefin framework, I think many of you have seen this framework before. It is no 2 times 2 metrics, but actually we're going to use it as one, but don't tell anyone, because it has 4 obvious domains here, this whole thing. So from clear, complicated, complex to chaotic, I will go over each and every one of them. So there's way more things into this whole framework that we can talk about after the talk. But for now, like, really focusing on these 4 domains is totally enough. And every domain here has its own recommendation for sense making, for really structuring everything that you do in this domain. And we will go over them with a lot of examples. And for now, you're probably still super confused. And I will try to get you unstuck here in this whole topic now. We will start with the first one that's down here, the chaotic domain, the chaos. Yeah. So chaos is actually something that you've never seen or done before. So you really have to trust your gut feeling, you have to act, you have to check your results. So think of the pandemic, the recent pandemic. That was something most of us never experienced before. There were a few people that knew virologists, that knew what you could actually do, but most of the people, it was just a complete novel thing. So for most of the politicians, no one ever knew how to deal with a crisis like this. So what you had to do is you had really trust your gut feeling. You had to act quick. You had to do something. And you didn't really know if this is the right thing to do, but you had to try. And then see what happens. Take these results and then try to respond. Do the next thing. And get through this step by step by trying, by experimenting. And I think you can think of a lot of things in IT where you had the same thing, where you are in a complete novel situation, you don't know what to do, and you really have to think of, try out new technologies, emerge the requirements, and really try and get to somewhere where you want to be. And in this very chaos, in this status where you're in, where you don't know what you're using, what kind of technology, where you don't know your requirements, what are you even estimating? So there's just no sense to estimate anything because you don't know what you're building. Next thing, I promise, will be way more tangible. That's the clear domain. That's the complete opposite of the chaotic domain. So in a clear domain, you always have a direct cause and effect relationship. So there's little information, there's just a few variables, there's really best practices around everything. So you just have to sense where are you, categorize it, and then just do it, respond. So let me give you an example here. You build the same WordPress website for another customer. So you're using the same template. You can actually tell them, okay, it's going to take me 3 weeks, going to be done, will cost you 4,500 euros. That's it. You can estimate it easily because you've done it so many times. You already know, you have super best practices for everything. But on the other hand, I will utilize a word that kind of represents all these estimates for me in a good way. I will call them magnitude. So where you have a high magnitude of estimations and a low magnitude of estimations. So the high magnitude estimations are actually the estimations where you say, okay, if you F these estimations up, then you could basically destroy your business. So you're calculating a whole project wrong, and instead of 1 million euros, it costs you 2 million euros and you're ruined. And on the other hand, low magnitude estimations could be like story points. So if you get a story point wrong, nothing really happens. So and this magnitude thing gives this impact weight connotation to these estimations. Yeah, and so if you're looking at the lower estimations here in these, you're doing a WordPress template. Thing is, why should you estimate it? So if you say, okay, it takes me a month, I will do 4 one-week sprints, and you're estimating everything you're doing there. But why? Because you could just pull out your plan. You actually know how long it's going to take. So why should you estimate something that is already super, super clear until the end? Because you've done it so many times. It would just cost you time and money, and there would be no additional value. Okay, one could say maybe there could be some value in the longer run, but of course this just depends on the very context here. But I think we're getting to one very core argument of this whole new estimates movement here. Because they say estimates in such kinds of sense are just really wastes. So in the lean kind of sense, the wastes of software development, for example. So they say, where is actually the estimate's value? And I think in some cases, they really get a point. But now let's go over some really exciting, better examples that we are usually confronted with in software development. Because usually we're not building the same thing with the same WordPress template, and we're not in some chaotic domain where no one knows what's going on, but usually we're somewhere in between. So usually we're somewhere in between heaven and hell, yeah? Somewhere between chaos and clear. And we're mostly moving back and forth. So think of what you're usually doing. Let's say you're developing some CRUD operation. Yeah? You're doing that with a simple UI. You are experienced in a certain technology. You've done that in Angular and with Java so many times, and you're super experienced. You already have good practices on how to do that. Yeah? You can come up with a pretty accurate analysis of this whole thing and a pretty accurate plan for its implementation. Should be doable if you've done it with the same technology over and over again. So this is what I call complicated. And on the other hand, complex would then be, now you're doing the same thing, but you're having a way more complex UI, new business logics. You're doing it in React for now, which is completely new for you. And I'm sure no one of you would be sitting there and saying, okay, I know how to do it. It's super easy, yeah. I know everything up front. That won't be the case. You definitely have to get to know the new technology. You have to get to know the new requirements and really get into it because you've never done such a business logic, for example. So, and this is what I tell, when I say we're moving back and forth in between these two, because we always have to challenge ourselves, have to try out new things, have to get to know new technologies, new requirements. And this is where we're moving back and forth, and I think this is a usual thing that we're doing in software development. And I think this is also a very good quote from Alan Hollop here to this whole complex domain. And he said, building software is nothing like building houses. In software, you don't know what you're building or how you'll build it when you start the project. You might think you do, but you're usually wrong. And if I would ask like each and every one of you, I would get a lot of, yeah, that's right. Because this is just a case we always think, okay, we're getting this right now. This time everything works like as designed, but then we're doing it and we're ending up doing something completely different. And sometimes we're abandoning a whole plan and starting over new. And I think this is just where software delivery usually lives. So, and what does this mean for our estimations now, to really get to the core of this talk here? Do you remember the very beginning where I said, let's go a bit into business agility, deep dive into business agility? And I think this is where really the organizational structures and the different magnitudes of estimations really come into play. So we're now in this, what I call high magnitude, complex kind of setting. We're at Cookie Bank. Cookie Bank has a project management and it has a development department. And the project that Cookie Bank now wants to do, they're thinking on this project-based kind of thing. They want to do is super high value. So they say, we're not even sure if our business can survive if we're not doing this project. So if you get that estimation wrong here, it could really harm your business. So, and then project management says, okay, now please estimate how much and how long this is going to take us. That's what they're saying to the development department. Usually then department comes up with some plan. It's taking so much time and it's going to cost us so much money. And yeah, this is our perfect project plan here. And given the fact of constant discovery and given the fact that actually this project is so important that we're not sure if we can not do it, why should we then really estimate cost and time? Of course, there's a lot of but things here, but let me explain. Because usually you are maybe doing something because you've always done it like this, because you've always estimated your software projects, or maybe because your stakeholders want you to. And people say, yeah, but that's just what we do. It helps us think about the problem, and then we know what we're actually doing. But yeah, if you say we're constantly discovering, we're constantly finding out what we want to do in the progress of our project, then I think there's not much where we can base these estimates on. I know it sounds very provocative, but again, giving this constant discovery, if you always push people to get to done on time, and this really burns people out. If you are following that artificial plan, it creates, from my point of view, kind of a dysfunction here as well. And it also needs enormous infrastructure. It needs this whole thing to manage everything around staying on schedule. And sometimes you even sacrifice quality in your whole product. Who did this to actually adhere to a timeline? Yeah, okay, then just do it quick. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Because you just want to stay on that artificial timeline, because that's just what you do. You're sacrificing maybe product market fit. You're not really looking at your customer anymore. You're just doing that because we have to act quickly now to stay on schedule. And of course, also this whole infrastructure about staying on time really needs a lot of money, and why not spending that money to actually create some value? And I think they really got a point here in that kind of sense. So, and I think what you should do is really consider if estimates are really necessary in such a thing here. But before you now really rage quitting and saying, okay, but we need that for coordination and so on, and how are we going to do it then, and yeah, whatever, they pose a real good alternative here. And this alternative here is, they say, actually do some work. Yeah? And what they mean by this is prototype things. So you all maybe used spikes, yeah, where you actually try out new things. Yeah? And this is what they're saying, prototype your project. So go and take, I don't know, 3-4 people, if it's depending of course on the whole project context, take 3-4 people and look what is the most important thing, what is the core of this whole project. And then try to implement this thing really quick, just in a small time frame of 3-4 weeks, and really get into this before actually utilizing all these resources to estimating everything up front. Because then you're constantly discovering, you're already reducing complexity. Because you see maybe that you're getting to a framework limitation here and there, or that this thing that you actually wanted to build needs some data that you cannot get before, I don't know, department XY can do that in 3 years or so, yeah? You're actually reducing the complexity, and for example also the unforeseen complexity, and in the end you might end up with already having something valuable, something tangible. And the next good thing here is that you're planning, that you're basing on reality, because you might already find out if this what you're trying to do is doable with 3 or 4 people, or if you actually need 3 teams and 2 years to actually do that. And I think they are also right with that, because it's more accurate than an estimation, because you're actually trying anything. It's not just theory, it's not just thinking, but it's actually doing, actually trying out. And also, what is the worst case here? If you're really time boxing it in resource-wise and time-wise, then you might end up with maybe roughly the same amount of costs for the estimation on the one hand and trying out prototyping on the other hand. And the worst case, of course, you're killing a project that's a couple of weeks old maybe, yeah. So it's also very controllable. And I think this approach is, yeah, a truly agile approach, because it emphasizes experimentation, that whole inspection and adaptation that you should bring when you're really working in an agile kind of sense. Yeah, and I think this could be, in some cases, a really good alternative to actually estimating things. So now the project is running. Yeah? We actually decided we're doing that. So now we're on that macro level. Yeah? We're estimating stories in a refinement. So, and then we are super constrained by our business analysis. They're defining stories, they're refining them 10 times, then they have their sign-off process, and then they're passing down their scroll of truth to the agile development. And yeah, of course, first of all, that's truly not agile. Yeah, there's some water, scrum, fall, whatever, what they're doing here. And first of all, of course, thing is, requirements should always emerge, yeah. Like business analysis development, there shouldn't be really a difference here. It should be all kind of the same. Everyone should definitely think about requirements and should really emerge these requirements and see scope as a constant of change, and experiment with rapid user feedback, conversation over all layers, rather than just developing things. And now, as an example, we have all these stories now ready, yeah? So we know that story 1 has 3 story points, story 2 has 8 story points, story 3 has 5 story points. We know that's our capacity because we're already measuring our velocity. We know, okay, 15 story points for a sprint, perfect, yeah, we can do that. And if these story points are actually a result of a good conversation, so if we're really trying to understand what we're doing in our refinement, and then as a result of this whole process, we have that story points and we can use them, that's fine. But it should be about really understanding, questioning, yeah? Going forward to really creating value. And if then in the end we have story points and we're using them for planning, that's fine. But mostly these story points are just a pointing exercise. I mean, who of you did that? Yeah, then we're just pushing each other to get to an estimate in the end. Yeah, to have that story point have to know now how many story points is this, because then we can say, okay, Now we have exactly 15, we can start. And if this happens, of course, then some people just are really constrained, yeah? So it actually hinders the value creation in my point of view, because then you are adhering to a process because that's what you always do, that it would be a process over people, exactly the opposite of what we want to do. And of course, this would in the end create some kind of waste. So what could we do instead for planning? What they pose is you could go for average stories, not for story points. So we could say we worked on that project for 3 months now, and we know that we are usually developing around 6 to 7 stories per sprint. Yeah, that's usually perfect throughput in our team, and we know that always works. So why then not take, let's say, if we can keep these stories about the same size all the time? Why then not just taking all these stories and taking the average number of story that we can actually develop, keeping all the stories, how they emerge constant? This would perfectly work. Because then it also would be more about the understanding of the thing, of the whole thing, and really focus on what we want to achieve here. And people say, okay, but then what if we cannot satisfy the sprint goal? Yeah, but what is the sprint goal? What is the sprint goal? Is the sprint goal to actually finish all the stories in a sprint? I don't think so. I think this thing here is again to create value, because I don't really care if I mess up my sprint and I just develop 3 stories instead of 7 or whatever. The goal here is to actually develop value, to have value in the end. That is the one thing. And I think that's what Scrum was designed for, to actually create value. And to deliberately have that break, like every 1 or 2 weeks in one sprint, to actually look at the value you created. And then look forward. Are we on the right track? So we're inspecting it, and then maybe we're adapting it. Maybe we're going in a different direction. And this is what Scrum really was designed for. And not to have an artificial sprint goal where you can actually fill some pointed issues in there and then in the end have something. And then you're putting in another 3-point story that is actually not that valuable because you have 3 story points capacity left, and yeah, there's just no point in that. So actually focus again on that value. And I think this is what this average story thing does, because you don't have to worry if it's complete or not in the end. Yeah, of course it should be the goal. But if you're then pulling in, because you have 3 capacity in the end, another story, and you're actually starting it, you're actually creating value, so what's the point? Of course you should do that. Let's go to the very last example before we do our recap. And look again at this high magnitude complex thing, but now in a bit of a different setting, and I promise you that real world example. So now there's Cookie Bank again. Cookie Bank has a project management. And this project management now needs a detailed plan for its implementation. But this time, they don't have an internal development. They want to do it externally. So this is where usually we come into play, where we're actually doing projects with different customers, because that's what such companies like we do. And what Cookie Bank actually wants is like, give me cost, give me time. Like, they want to have planning safety. They want to reduce their risk, of course. And that's a very legitimate interest, because that's how businesses plan. And it actually adds value for them, because they have that planning safety. They have like the contract in the middle that creates that certain kind of trust that they actually need. But still, these estimations don't necessarily create value for the end user, because of course, surprise, surprise, we have to price that into the contract we're giving them, that we actually took 2 weeks to estimate this whole project. Of course, that's just what we have to do. It's costs for us, but it's no value for the end user again. And I think that's a very legitimate point here as well. But what can you do? And yeah, that's an extremely good question, because there's super limited things you can actually do, super limited options. So a thing would be, if you already cooperated with Cookie Bank and you actually created some kind of trust around your whole cooperation, or with a proof of proficiency, with a very good contract and so on, maybe you could make a deal with them to do that POC approach. Tell them the advantages over usual estimations, and maybe you could convince them to actually do that. But of course, what I also told you is we want to look at this whole estimates movement thing, yeah. And this is where it gets even harder, yeah. So what we then have, Cookie Bank is now a really, really big bank. They have lots of vendors around them. There's lots of departments in them. And then you have all these dependencies on your project, and you're just one little thing in this whole thing, and there's so many things that constrain you. And this is where the estimates movement really has its strengths, where they say, hey, but what if we have all these high coordination efforts? What if there are so many teams, so many vendors that all have their delivery dates? We need something that we can rely on, because of course you should reduce dependencies wherever possible. But in so many ways, in this context, it's usually not possible to really get rid of all the dependencies. I mean, that would be the perfect world, but it's not going to happen, of course. So you always have these dependencies here, and you always have things where you have to rely on. Yeah, this is just how it works. And most of the time, it's also that the business is constrained by money. So no estimate, no funding could be the case. And often there are so many things beyond development, beyond a team. So you're delivering the next big thing in tech. But of course you need your marketing department to launch a big ad campaign for it. So this is so many things that is around this whole thing that actually needs some kind of estimates. And then on the other hand, in a daily business, maybe you do not just have the resources to do all these exploratory approaches around that. And maybe sometimes it's just easier and more cost efficient to actually do an estimation. So this is where it really gets a bit foggy around the whole estimates and no estimates thing, because they're then talking about different terms in magnitude and granularity in their different approaches. So what are they talking about? Are they talking about like what estimates usually does is this super big, all these constraints things here, and the no estimates mostly talks about the little story point and so on, and they're not really clear in what they're actually arguing. That's from what I read. And so what is my experience here? Of course, Cookie Bank is just a synonym for another bank that I've worked with, me and my team. And it was actually a pretty big project. We were around 3 to 7 people, around 1 million a year long. And we completed it without estimates, almost. Yeah. And the highlight here, completed and almost. Yeah. So, of course, we started with estimates. Of course we did, yeah. Of course they needed some timeline range. They needed some scope range, acceptance criteria. And of course they needed a fixed price. They have to know what it costs. So, and of course we had to come up with all of this at first. But then we started the whole project, and of course what happened, the whole thing was just too complex. The team was too constrained. We had a lack of cross-functionality here because we were always dependent on another team topologies thing here. We were constrained then by the platform team. Then there was other teams with the dependencies. Then there was like rights management, or you know, all that thing that can just happen during the day. And you just end up with a huge dependencies list that you have somewhere, and it's not gonna work. And even with all these variables, with the scope variety, with a timeline range, it ended up in massive stress, adhering to the deadline. We have to be done by December 15th. Of course, we sacrificed quality here and there. And of course, it was just a massive stress frustration, missed deadlines in the end. And then we were there and like, okay, yeah, it's just the timeline just doesn't make sense anymore. But on the other hand, of course, they already contracted us, and the project was just too important to not do it. I mean, there was no way around. It was a very important project for that bank. And so what we first of all did, we abandoned Scrum. We said, okay, it's not working because this is just a whole thing of unpredictability here. We cannot predict anything if we're so constrained by everything in here. And we started something Scrum Ban-like, our own thing that we invented here. And we actually took the customer and said, okay, then please people, if we cannot predict what we're going to do in a couple of weeks or maybe even in the next week, then we need your help in prioritization. And this really did the thing to really prioritize then the next big thing that we're actually doing, the next most important bug that is constraining someone in there. And in the end, what we created was a very high trust environment. That was really cool. We were super transparent. We did a lot of very, very close collaboration. We really became a reliable partner in the end. They knew they can trust us. They see what we're doing. They see that we are doing our best, that we cannot go faster. Yeah, that's just not working. And this is what really flipped the switch here. Because then all these low-level estimations, all these story point estimations somehow got irrelevant because we're doing the next most important thing. We know we have to do the whole project, so why are we then estimating things? But of course, we had all the other things where we said we need these timelines for other decision makers and so on. And we really tried to look at what stories, what items did we complete in the last month and try to predict if this is really a thing that we could maybe deliver in the next month. And then we did some timeline ranges in there, and this actually helped because then we had some kind of good predictability with a range. We could communicate with other stakeholders, we could communicate with other departments, with other vendors, and this really helped us here. And of course, yeah, that was still no smooth sailing, still went sideways regardlessly, but it was way better than before because we just freed ourselves from this mental being on time and being stressed and so on. And I think that was just possible because of this good trust environment, because of this high transparency, because of this close collaboration. And this really worked. And in the end, it ended up with way less stress, with a higher performing, with a happier team, and with a happier customer. And this really encouraged us to experiment. And yeah, we will definitely continue to do so. So of course, the last question here is, so Julian, do you want us to estimate things now or not? And as a consultant, I can just give you one answer. It depends. And of course, like determining if you should estimate or not is a high complexity problem in itself because it's so dependent on your individual context. But I think the one thing that I could say is that in this really high magnitude kind of things, you should always assess the environment that you're in. Of course, question if the estimates you're doing are waste or if they are useful. And perhaps try projections, maybe it works for you. And yeah, on the other hand, with that low magnitude kind of thing, do the same, of course. Always assess the environment you're in and question if these estimates are useful or not. But it might work better if you're like in that high trust culture that we experienced. With that deep understanding of your domain, of your business, of your product, of your technology, and low dependencies. And this is actually, I read a lot about this topic. This is actually a very common thread throughout the whole internet that people reported. In such settings, it works better. And this is very true from my experience here. But always, as I said, it's always about the individual circumstances. I can't give you a recommendation here if you should estimate or not, of course. And I myself am also not 100% convinced if no estimates is the best thing. But what I know for sure, on the other hand, estimating all the time is also not the right thing to do. One more thing. So what's the last thing to say here? In the end, estimate and no estimates kind of have the same goal. Yeah? They want to deliver software as cost efficient, as best with the highest quality as possible. But some of them just here really have certain kinds of views, talking about different things. So in the end, it's always about eliminating all the waste. Yeah? And as I said, these estimates always live in their certain kinds of businesses, in their world of agility, and they're inseparably connected in so many ways. And yeah, as I said, they might not be necessary everywhere. And this whole no estimates thing here, this is for me just one example as a leverage for actually eliminating waste. And in this example, as we experienced it, there was sometimes that process of a people. You're just doing things because you always done them. And it was maybe also following a plan of actually responding to change. And so we touched so many things with the potential to really rewild Agile, to go back to its roots and come really back to the original idea of agility. And I want to encourage you to find these spots, tackle these spots, and to collectively bring Agile back to what it was born, to the ability to rapidly create and respond to change. Thank you.